All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. This is DFS Army's tournament strategy show, where usually we look at last night's slate, we talk about it, see what went well, what didn't go well, and then we'll look at today's slate and go game by game, talk through some of the guys I'm looking at as potential leverage plays, guys who I want to be double the field on, some situations I don't like that much that I might want to try and avoid. And we have a pretty interesting slate. A nice 6-gamer. They took off the last 2 games, so there'll be like a late night slate with a 2-gamer. But yeah, let's get into it. We have some gross teams playing each other too, which will make it fun. I didn't play last night. I had work stuff going on, so couldn't do anything there. But from my understanding, it looks like Terry Rozier went off against Dallas, which was solid at 6,600. Jalen Brown had a fantastic night at super low ownership. Royce O'Neal looks like he was in the Nuts lineup. Jeremy Sohan as well. He didn't really do great, but I think he just made that line work. Rudy Gobert made it. Devin Vassell looks like he was in there. Malik Monk and Zach Collins. That was just kind of like the lineup I saw for the 100,000 winning lineup, but it seems like some of the data has been off there, so I might be wrong. So anyway, moving forward, let's look at today's slate. Like I said, it's one that I like a good bit. There's some interesting news I think we might get as we get closer to lock, but that's just some speculation. We have the Hornets going up against the Washington Wizards. The Hornets are not a good team. We know they suck, but we also know the Wizards are bad too. And that's why this game has the highest total on the slate. These are 2 really bad teams going up against each other. It never feels good playing guys from these 2 teams, but it makes a lot of sense. So starting off with the Hornets, like I said, Trey Mann is listed as questionable. That is not huge, but it's big because a lot of the guards I already like on the Hornets tonight. If he gets ruled out, it goes from me liking them to loving them and making them core plays. So if Trey Mann gets ruled out, guys like Mishik becomes a must-have for me. And then other guys you see likes on are the obvious. Miles Bridges hasn't been in the best of form, but the matchups also haven't been against teams like the Wizards. And I expect him to go off tonight and have a really good game. 8,400 is a decent price tag, so I like this spot for him. Brandon Miller, I like even more, mostly because he's cheaper and has decent upside. Bridges is the main guy for the Hornets, but Miller has decent upside at 7K, highest total game environment. I'm loading up here on the Hornets tonight. It could burn me. I'm totally aware of that. That happens when you play DFS in general, but especially when you play teams that just aren't good. But in a matchup like this, it just feels too good to be true. And then Grant Williams, I also like. Simodel liked him a lot. The Simodel likes pretty much all of the Hornets tonight. But he's one I just didn't want to forget about. He wasn't showing up in my early runs, and so I need to make sure he did show up. And so that's why the like is there. Of course, on the pre-lock show, which will be at 5:30 p.m. Eastern today, Brandon and I should both be on that show. That's when we'll talk through the execution of how that's when we'll focus on the execution side of things. That's when we'll talk about mins, maxes, what we're actually doing in the optimizer, and we'll go from there. But yeah, I love the Hornets tonight. Gonna try and make sure I get as many of these guys as possible. Bertans also is showing up for me currently at 4,200. He's been seeing decent minutes, so I'm comfortable with this situation. And like I said, I'm loading up here. Not gonna be afraid of it. I know some of y'all might hate that, but sometimes you just gotta roll with what makes sense. The Wizards have actually been in better form though, so it's kind of like we have 2 sides of a different coin. We have the Hornets who have been bad. The Wizards have looked semi-decent recently, which kind of makes me even more nervous to play them because I don't like to ride the high wave. I prefer to play guys who people are questioning and no one else likes. But Kuzma has been in great form. He's only 7,800. So much makes sense here for him. So I am going to attack with Kuzma. I'm going to make sure I'm at least matching the field. Ideally, I'll be able to get a little bit of leverage, but I don't think this is going to be a low-owned spot. So it might be a little bit of hard. It might be a little difficult to get the leverage I want. Denny Avdia, another guy who's been in fantastic form, and he's only 6,700. Great usage rate, great matchup. I'm going to have exposure to him tonight as well. Tyus Jones, good matchup. I'm a little bit more indifferent with Tyus. Again, this is the highest total game environment, so I want a lot of these guys to show up as much as they possibly can, but he's a little bit lower in my totem pool currently. Jordan Poole, we've been on for a little bit now. He's finally started to come through for us. He's been a bit more consistent, has a soft matchup. I'm scared, though. I am scared. He is going to be pretty chalky, and I feel like some of these guys, it doesn't make statistical sense. It doesn't really make logical sense, but once they start seeing ownership, things just go bad. And Jordan Poole kind of feels like one of those guys, but everything is pointing in the direction of playing Jordan Poole. Sim model likes him as well. Matchup is fantastic. Game environment is good. And so if he can just stay in this form for one more game, I'm willing to bite the bullet here. And hopefully we can jump off on the next game. And then Corey Kispert and Rashawn Holmes, kind of not just like Tyus, but I'm thinking about them in similar ways. They're showing up for me, but they're not priorities for me. Holmes at only 3,700 makes a ton of sense. With the production he's been in a really soft matchup against the Hornets, we know we can play bigs against this team. He fits that mold, even if he's not seeing as many minutes as I would like, but at 3,700, that kind of mitigates that risk for me. And then Corey Kispert is just kind of like a last fill-in option if you need a $4,400 player. Not a priority for me, but I like seeing him show up a little bit. So, like I said, we don't have a lot of high total games on this slate. So that's kind of why this is a game that I wanted to spend a bit more time on. What's up, Jay? Hope you're doing all right, man. Thomas, hope you're doing well as well. Good to see you guys. I know I've been gone for a little bit, last 2 days, but work stuff, can't avoid it. Jay said, I got this 20 max down packed. Fun day yesterday. Nice, man. Glad it went well. Love to see it. All right, the games do get a little bit less interesting moving forward. We have the Pelicans going up against the Sixers. The Sixers have just not been the same ever since Joel Embiid was ruled out of his injury. Tyrese Maxey's still out of his concussion. But for the Pelicans, they're pretty healthy. And so what we see here is they have a softer matchup than you would assume because the Sixers are a little banged up right now. My concern for the Pelicans is just that they're pretty healthy. Whenever they're healthy, hard to get overly excited about these guys. The sim model does like Brandon Ingram. Trey Murphy. Oh, yeah, it does like Brandon Ingram. CJ is solid. Zion is also solid in this spot. It really just comes down to who you like here. For me, I'm going to prioritize Brandon Ingram. He's been, in my opinion, in the best form recently. And I like that he's a little bit cheaper than Zion, but I don't really think you can go wrong here. It's really going to be Ingram who I prioritize. Trey Murphy, I talked about him on the last slate. He went off at super low ownership. He's just been very efficient. He's really been pretty dominant, and at a pretty low price tag, he hasn't changed at all. So just like last slate, I'm going to put a like on him. Would love to see him show up at least just a little bit naturally. I don't love the idea of forcing in Trey Murphy when everyone's healthy, but he's just been good. And so hard to get overly critical of not playing Trey Murphy when no one else is really talking about him when he's been really solid lately. And in a solid matchup against the Sixers, like I mentioned, soft matchup because they've been struggling defensively. Jay said, never knew narrowing pool was key for 20 max. It helps a lot. I mean, there's so many different strategies for DFS these days, man. I always say do what works for you. And if narrowing your pool works, that's awesome. That's awesome, man. And then for the Sixers tonight, we talked about it. Maxey out, Embiid out, but that's not really new information. And so there's not really a ton of value we're seeing here. I think the biggest thing is that we're all expecting, and by all accounts, Kyle Lowry isn't on the injury report at all. And so Kyle Lowry should return this game, which makes guys like Cameron Payne not feel like a necessity at 5,100. It really just makes this team a little bit more balanced. So no one's really standing out for me on the Sixers because the Pelicans are a team I don't like to pick on too much. You can take your one-off dart throw shots here, but Tobias Harris has been a little disappointing here lately. 7,700, still a decent price tag for him, but I don't love the matchup. Buddy, I've been trying to get on board with. I thought that he's been in some decent positions where he should have had some nice ceiling performances, but he's just been off. Kelly O is viable. I think he's probably the most viable play on this team, especially if you're like doing a single entry line or something. But still not my favorite. Kyle Lowry is priced appropriately, not standing out for me. Paul Reed, if he starts, is viable. The sim model likes him, and so that's why I have some interest in him. But they've been playing around with this rotation. They don't have an answer for what they want to do here without Joel Embiid. So if he starts, he's fine. Mo Bamba, not overly excited about, but if he starts, he's slightly more viable as well. I did see that it looks like Nicholas Batum might be questionable. That does make me feel a little bit better about playing a guy like Paul Reed or Mo Bamba if he starts, just because they utilize Batum in that 5 spot sometimes as well. So again, don't love the Sixers tonight. I'm okay with one-off shots here, but not a team I really want to build around tonight. And then we have the Timberwolves. Man, this is a team. Like, I don't know if y'all, you saw it. If you're watching this show, you definitely saw Anthony Edwards' block. I said it a few weeks ago. Anthony Edwards is one of my favorite players in the NBA right now. He's questionable so often because he gets legitimate injuries, and he's just like, I'm going to play because why? What else am I going to do? Just sit there? This is one time where, and this is probably my first time saying this about an NBA player, he probably should rest. Like, he keeps having these ankle injuries. He banged his head on the back of the board yesterday. That fall was super hard. Like, and just sit. Y'all are in a decent spot right now. The matchup against the Cavs isn't my favorite. If Anthony Edwards plays, I'm not trying to match field weight, especially if he's going to be at 24% ownership on the back end of a back-to-back. Not my favorite spot. It would be kind of crazy just from a narrative perspective. He goes off today. If he was at lower ownership, I would be a little bit more excited about it. But with him being this chalky on a 6-game slate and a tough matchup, I'm pretty comfortable not getting overly excited about that. Rudy Gobert makes a little bit more sense for me. We didn't talk about it, but Cat is out still with that knee injury. He'll be out for a little bit. Monty Morris is TBD. And so whenever Karl Anthony Towns is out, Rudy Gobert is a slightly more viable for me. With Evan Mobley out, the front court defense for the Cavs typically struggles a little bit, but they're still a really solid defensive team. So matchup isn't great, but he's a viable big for me on this slate at 7,700. The real thing here is that I just really don't want Anthony Edwards to play tonight, just because the Timberwolves could look much more interesting if he sits. But we won't get into that. I do know there's ownership on this team. Thomas, you're right, man. Kyle Anderson is extremely chalky today, which is wild to me because, again, I didn't play yesterday, but I know he burned you all, a lot of you guys last night. But you know me, I like playing guys who burned us the night before, but usually I like to do that when the guy is low owned. Kyle Anderson isn't really on my radar right now, but again, this changes dramatically if Anthony Edwards ends up getting added to the injury report for whatever reason, because then Kyle Anderson becomes a bit more viable. He sees that increasing usage. His role on this team and everyone's role on this team really changes without Anthony Edwards. And so I'm fine with sending Anderson to the moon, but I'm probably going to play him, Anthony, if we get news that Ant doesn't play. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people were surprised that Kyle Anderson disappointed last night. I mean, on the pre-lock show, we talk about it all the time. Whenever there's injury news here, you never trust slow-mo. Sometimes you have to do it when he's really cheap in that 3K range, like you're talking about power. But Kyle Anderson is never a trustworthy player. If you, Kyle Anderson, I've had as a core play before, but I always warn that he goes out there and he does a lot of cardio. He just sits there in a corner sometimes. You can't expect too much out of him. But like I said, just because it happened last night, he does have the ability to get hot, especially with his 3-point shot. And if he's getting involved a bit more from an offensive perspective with usage rates and things of that sort, increasing assists and etc., it does make him more viable. So I'm willing to get burned again, but I'm not playing, or I'm not going to go too over on Kyle Anderson unless Edwards is out. So that ownership is wild to me, though. For just the way the slate is right now, he shouldn't be that popular. But if everyone's expecting Ant to sit, then I get it a bit more. But we'll talk about this on the pre-lock show, depending on what happens with news. We'll get there. But yeah, I don't like the Timberwolves too much, which shouldn't be too surprising. This is a pretty low total game. Spread is close, so if the game can stay close, it definitely presents a little bit more upside, but I prefer the Cavs side of this game significantly more than the Timberwolves as of right now. Part of that has to do with Strus being out, Donovan Mitchell still being out, and Evan Mobley being ruled out. That, of course, gives guys like Okoro a bit more of a secure role. Niang and Dean Wade should start tonight. Dean Wade is the priority for me. Obviously, we've seen his upside. We know what he can do here when they're missing guys like Mobley, Mitchell, Strus. But I'm not expecting that same kind of performance. He's just really cheap at 3,800 and makes a lot of sense. I don't want to go too crazy on him. Ideally, he won't be too chalky on this slate, but he makes a lot of sense at that price tag. Niang, I think, could be a little sneaky. We know Niang also has a high upside, especially if his shot is falling. Matchup is tough against the Timberwolves. We have to remember that. But with him starting, I think he could be, I don't think pivot's the right word, but another viable option when we're looking at lower, cheaper players. The interesting thing about this slate, too, is that there aren't really a lot of studs that we want to pay for. We'll get to SGA. I will force and try to be close to field weight exposure on SGA, but I do think the ideal build today is going to be in that mid-range 7, 8K with a few 4K, 3K guys in there. I don't think we really need to go studs and duds today, but of course I'll have some lines like that just to hedge my bets. Jared Allen, tough matchup against the Timberwolves. At 7,900, I am curious to see where ownership is going to fall here. It's really going to dictate it. Ideally, Jared Allen will be low owned, so I can take a solid shot on him here. Like I said, the matchup is tough. Game environment isn't great. Ownership is low. There's not really a great reason to play him here outside of the fact that Jared Allen sometimes just has some of these ceiling performances in tough matchups, especially when Mobley's out. So not someone I really want more than 10% exposure to, but if he's only like 2-3% owned, I'm willing to have like 5-10% exposure to him. Darius Garland, a little too cheap at 7,600. He's someone I don't want to forget about. I need to make sure he shows up in a few of my lines. Karis LeVert is showing up a lot because of what we talked about already. Okoro is viable as well. So I like this team because they're missing a lot of guys and they're not too expensive. They just make a lot of lines work. So don't love this game environment, but I feel a little bit better about it because the Timberwolves are on the back end of a back-to-back. What's up? Anthony said, do you like Zion Ingram stack? Run it back with Tobias and Oubre. Oh, there we go. We just got the Anthony Edwards questionable tag, but as Ant, it means absolutely nothing. He plays through these questionable tags most of the time. Ideally, he just gets ruled out like they just did with Monty Morris. Anthony, I don't love it. I don't love that stack. I don't like the 76ers too much tonight. I'm okay if Zion and Brandon Ingram end up in the same line together, but I don't really think you need a game stack there. Could be wrong, but I don't love it. What's up, Zolo? It's been a little bit. Hope you're doing all right. Yeah, I hope you're doing well too. I'm doing all right. Yeah. And officially questionable. Yep. Man, we might be forced to play the Timberwolves and might be forced to play Anderson, like we talked about. I'm gonna load up if that happens. I will. Let's see. Yep, Anthony, that's exactly it. It's gonna be non-slow-mo, and I'm gonna play Gobert too in that situation. Those guys get skyrocketed up for me, and I want to mix those guys in with my Wizards and Hornets. That's how I'm thinking about it. Lillard or LeBron? Oh, Anthony, man. I didn't look at that slate, to be honest with you. I do like Giannis a lot tonight. I don't love the Lakers here, but I don't have a decision between Lillard or LeBron. I like Giannis. Pelican starters will be on the bench at the start of the fourth quarter because of the blowout. Yeah, wouldn't shock me. Yeah, in that game, I'm really just looking at some one-offs here and there. I don't love building around it. It's time for the mortals to pay. Release the Kraken. I don't know what exactly you're alluding to, but all right, man. Okay. All right, let's move on. I like the Cavs. For the Magic tonight, not a fan. Not a fan. Wendell Carter Jr. is questionable. That could make things a little bit more interesting, but I still don't love this team. Never love picking on the Knicks, even though they're missing a lot of the guys that make their defense pretty solid, but they're coached well, and so still not a team I like to pick on too much. Of course, you can take a shot on Paolo or Franz here if you would like to, but lowest total game on the slate, not a spot that's overly interesting to me. Jalen Brunson's questionable. Obviously, if he gets ruled out, again, Josh Hart, Dante DiVincenzo really become the main priorities here. I have a like on Josh Hart. He disappointed a lot of people last time out. And like I mentioned, low owned players who disappointed, even if Brunson plays, is not a situation I have to go crazy on. He'll probably only be, I don't know the exact ownership yet. That should be updated here soon. But it'll probably be pretty low owned, especially if Brunson plays. And so I can just have 5-10% exposure here, have decent leverage. And like we saw on last night's slate, when you look at guys who are extremely low owned around Jaylen Brown, Terry Rozier, who are only 5% owned, you don't need that much of them in your lines when you're running to be able to take down the tournament. You just need to have a little bit of exposure and hope they get in there with the guys that you like. Anthony, I don't feel like SGA is a must play on this slate. I really like the mid range, but I'm taking some shots on SGA. But the priority for me is going to be in that like 8 to 7K range today. I don't think SGA is a must. So yeah, gonna take a shot on Josh Hart as long as he's as low owned as I expect him to be. And then if Brunson's out, I'll have exposure to Hart and Dante DiVincenzo. Moving on, 2 games. We have the Hawks going up against the Grizzlies. The Hawks are the golden team that have a great matchup against the Grizzlies tonight. For the Hawks, Jalen Johnson's out, Trae Young's out, Kobe Buffkin's out, Okongwu's still out. And so that's why you're seeing some of this dark green on the screen because some of these guys are priced appropriately and they have a decent matchup against the Grizzlies. To me, DeAndre Hunter is really the only true priority I have tonight for the Hawks. I want him to show up. I want to be at least around Fieldway. I think he'll see some decent ownership with him. For me, it's always like this. If Jalen Johnson's out, I like DeAndre Hunter. If DeAndre Hunter's out, I significantly like Jalen Johnson more. It's changed with time because Jalen Johnson's proven he's just a really solid, consistent player. So he's always decently viable in the right matchups. But I still have that general philosophy. So DeAndre Hunter at 5K in a decent matchup is a priority for me tonight. I need to make sure he shows up in my lines. And so that's why I have a like on him currently. Outside of that, DeJounte Murray at 9,200. I don't expect him to be too chalky. He's someone that you definitely can force some exposure to without Trae Young in a decent game and decent game environment on this slate. When we don't have that many high total games, you could definitely do worse if you're just trying to take a shot. Bogdan, I'm not the biggest fan of. Sadiq Bey makes sense at this price tag, 5,700. He should start today as well. So there's a lot that makes sense here. He's been playing consistent minutes. He's showing up in my early runs, and so I don't have a like on him or anything because he's just showing up as much as he should be for me. Capella's fine. I think I have like 5% exposure to Capella right now. So not a priority for me, but he's just showing up in a few lines. We talked about Hunter. Bruno at 4,400 is playing. Like he's actually seeing the court, which is something that I didn't really see happening this too much this season. But with Okongwu out, it makes a lot of sense. He's staying around 20, 22 minutes, sometimes more. Matchup isn't tough. He does come off the bench, so he's not a starter. You're going to be like hoping and excited every time he's out there, like, all right, produce. And he is a pretty efficient producer as well. So he makes sense, viable value option. But again, he's not someone that you want as a core play. He's not one of the first guys you want to put on your line or anything like that. He just makes sense because of the price tag and the situation he's in currently. But there's definitely is some risk involved there. All right. For the Grizzlies, we know this team has a lot of injuries. We know Luke Kennard's doubtful, GG Jackson's questionable. It's possible if Kennard gets ruled out, we might see Goodwin see a start here, which again, a lot of these guys just did not expect to be talking about this much this season. But again, viable matchup against the Hawks here. I think Jaren Jackson Jr. at 8,200. I don't love playing him coming off of a strong performance, but soft matchup against the Hawks. It makes sense. JJJ makes me a little nervous personally. I have some bias there that I'm aware of, so I'm just trying to move past that. He makes sense. He's a viable play on this slate. Goodwin, same story if Kennard gets ruled out. But outside of that, I view the Memphis Grizzlies as just lineup fillers. I'm not really trying to force anyone in here because no one stood out for me too much. Vince Williams, it's probably option number 3 or 4 for me on this slate, or I mean on this team, but again, just not overly excited about it. I like some of the other games significantly more. Let's see. Rozier pissed me off. I played him the 3 slates prior and he never cracked 35. I last night and to the moon. Anthony, same. Same. I've been playing Terry Rozier for a long time. I didn't play last night, so I don't really know if I would have ended up playing him or not, but it did hurt a little bit to see, like, okay, now you want to show up. I've been talking about you for weeks. But yeah, I do like him today, which means he'll probably suck. McLaughlin value, Monty out, worth looking at. They're trying to trick us into the lowest total game if Ant is out. Possibly, man, possibly. It could be a trick, but you know me, I'm gonna go there. Are you 20 maxing or 150ing the $4? Oh, no, 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 no. I'm gonna do the mini. I'm gonna do the mini today. I'll probably 150 it and go from there. I've been on a 20 max streak where I've liked playing the 20 max $4, but yeah, I'm not about facing 100,000 players. There was a time, but that's not me anymore. All right, for the Heat, Tyler Hero's out, Kevin Love is out, and so that does open up things for this team. But we've known that for a while, so that's why there's not really any dramatic value because of those two guys being out. And then Jimmy Butler, sim model likes 8,200. He's been in better form, more consistent form. He's not seeing too much ownership. I don't like Jimmy enough for him to be a leverage play for me, but I do need him to show up in my lines tonight around 14-15% to match the field if it stays that way. Terry Rozier at low ownership at 6,500, showing his upside last night. It's hard for me to really believe he's going to be that low owned. The sim model likes him. I know it's on the back end of a back-to-back, but he's someone that I'm looking at as a potential leverage play on this slate. His ownership is low enough where me just getting 10-15% is decent leverage. I don't think that ownership is going to stay that low, but it's possible just because he has not been the most consistent player thus far. But I am willing to go back here against the Thunder in the second highest game total on the slate. That means a little bit less than it usually does because the totals in general are lower on this slate, but still, second highest total game. He's low owned. I always force exposure to these spots. You can make a similar argument for Bam Adebayo. Let me look a little bit closer at this matchup. Because I do remember when I was looking, the matchup for Terry isn't great here. The Thunder are giving up the 21st most fantasy points allowed to combo guards. That's not good. That's not really a good thing. Matchup is a little tough here. But on the other side of it, when you're looking at bigs and guys like Bam Adebayo, he has a soft matchup. Chet and the Thunder are giving up the 7th most points to versatile bigs like Bam Adebayo. And so the sim model didn't really like Bam that much, but I like the low ownership. And again, second highest total game on the slate, I always force exposure to, especially when we have some low owned, high upside potential performers. So Bam, Terry are guys I'm looking at as potential leverage plays. And then Butler, I would like to be over the field on, but I'm going to make sure I'm at least at field weight. And then someone said this like a week and a half or so ago. Someone was talking about Caleb Martin and how he's been in decent form. He's been high. He's been okay. At 4,500, he's just another viable value option. If we get injury news from that Timberwolves game, then I don't think Martin will be a necessity. But at this price tag, he's worth keeping in mind for me. And that's pretty much it. And then, let's see. Yeah, someone a week and a half ago was like, Martin's been in great form. Like, how are you not talking about him? Why aren't you looking at him? I'm like, bruh, he hasn't been good. Like, he hasn't been good. But the sim model likes him today. And so that's why I'm open to playing him today if we don't get more value. Again, nothing crazy, but 5% or something like that would be okay with that. So yeah, just worth mentioning. Sim model liked him. So for the Thunder, they're pretty healthy. And when we look at healthy teams like the Thunder, usually I don't like to play too many of these guys. The main piece here is SGA. The matchup, though, against the Heat is pretty neutral these days, pretty solid defense. Not one I like to pick on too much, not really any insane weak points. So SGA is SGA. I don't really care about matchups too much when it comes to him. If I had to guess, because, well, he's not looking like SGA is going to be too chalky. So, like, even just matching the field shouldn't be overly complicated today. So, let's say if he's going to be like 10, 15% owned, I plan on being right around that 10, 15% number. Just not a spot where I feel like this is a super soft matchup for him to avoid. SGA can be matchup proof, but when you look at most of his top performances, they usually come against teams that struggle against guards. Like even his last 70-point game was against the Suns. Booker, we talk about it a lot. Not as much as we used to because they're not on the slates as often as they used to be, but because they're shorter, you guys get it. But Suns, weak team against guards typically, and so makes sense that he had a ceiling performance there. Thunder, a little bit more league neutral. They're giving up the 17th most points to guards. And so a spot where I think SGA should do fine. He'll give us the raw points, which we might need on a 6-game slate with a low game total. And so that's why I'm trying to match the field on him just in case the slate breaks out that way. But I do think, again, in that 7 to 8K range, I'll even expand it to 6 to 8K, kind of like Brandon Miller a lot as someone who could have a high upside performance today. If we can get some 50, 60, 40, 50, 60-point performances out of some of those guys, I do think that lowers the necessity of needing a guy like SGA. So my plan here is just to match the field on him. Not overly excited about Chet or Josh Giddey, even though it looks like they're projecting decently well. Might need to look a little bit closer at that, but I don't love the spot. So yeah, guys, like I said, I like this slate, like the Hornets, like the Wizards, like some of the Pelicans. Love the Cavs. Timberwolves could make things interesting. Hawks are viable on the slate for me. And then we wrap up with some of the Miami Heat. So some interesting pieces here. News, of course, will dictate everything per usual. But me, B-Dubs, Brandon will be good to go for 5:30 p.m. Eastern to focus on the execution side of things during the pre-lock show. Link is in the description if you're interested in that. Promo code is BOB if you want a 10% discount for that. If not, I'll see you all on Monday, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Peace out, y'all.